All right, I just want to share brief opening words with you this evening. Opening words coming from our hymnal. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. So again, we're going to introduce ourselves. I am Patricia Infanti. I work for the Central East region, part of the regional staff, I serve as a primary contact for those of you who are in the region and know what that means. I serve the greater Philadelphia area. I serve the borough of Manhattan, and I serve congregations in the Central and South Jersey area, which is where I live. How convenient is that? I am also a member of the Safe Congregations team, which is a group of staff, one from each region, and Heather Bond, who is part of our UUA staff. We meet regularly, we train regularly, and we have lots of great support and opportunities to share with one another some of the challenges that we're having around safe congregations, and we work case studies together to be able to support congregations with things that come up for them. So I'm a part of that, and Kim Sweeney has introduced herself in the chat box. She's also part of our Safe Congregations team. So it's great to have her here as well. My co-leader, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Presley. As Patricia said, I am a member of the UUA Safe Congregations team, and I work in the similar role to Pat, but in the Mid-America region. So I'm a congregational life consultant. The Mid-America region, in case you don't know, runs from Michigan through the Dakotas, the north half of the country. We say we are proudly serving 13 of the nation's states. And part of my background in the whole thing about safe congregations comes from the work I've done in disaster relief and recovery. I was one of the founders of the trauma response ministry that we'll be mentioning later and such things. I also served a decade as a police chaplain, and so became very familiar with disaster preparedness and all those sorts of things. And so one of the great things about our Safe Congregations team is we deal not only with sort of the traditional things about how do we keep our people safe from unwanted physical behavior, but also how do we keep the congregations whole in so many other situations that we'll be talking about tonight that could threaten the congregation, the people, place, or things there. So back over to you, Pat.
Great. So just by way of introduction, just thinking a moment about our congregations and why we might be concerned about safety in our congregations. Many of us actually call the gathering space where we come together for worship on Sunday, we actually call that our sanctuary. And the word sanctuary certainly implies that it is a space that is safe from harm, and a space that is that is protected both from internal and external threat. And so the work of building and creating a safe congregation is really to kind of make that word sanctuary come alive for us. So a safe congregation, what does that mean? We can't always guarantee the safety in our congregations. Mostly what we do is we create policy, we plan, we prepare for things that could happen. And it's similar to getting insurance for our car. Out, when we're out in the world, we don't expect to have an accident, and we certainly don't want to have an accident, but having insurance will support us and will help us to recover and help us to heal in the event that we should have an accident. And it's similar with safe congregation policy. It provides us with a roadmap. It provides us with structure, because if we are in a situation where our safety has been threatened in some way, our anxiety goes up, and somehow you might be in that panic state. When the kitchen stove is on fire, it's good to already know where the fire extinguisher is. So in our congregations, if something were to happen in our congregation, it lowers the anxiety and helps us better deal with the situation and its aftermath. If we have plans and policies, and particularly if we have talked about it ahead of time. In some congregations, talking about it is actually the first hardest step. So we are going to focus on 3 specific areas, which I think will cover most of the safety considerations. We're going to talk about things that are primarily affecting people. We are going to talk about things that are primarily about our spaces and places. And then we're going to talk a little bit about those things that don't neatly fit in either one of those. And we know that, some things that happen to impact our sense of safety can be both natural, and they can also be things that we bring on ourselves or that others bring on us. So we'll keep that in mind as well. So I think it's time for Lisa to take the...
Actually,
no, it's not. It's me. Yes. Still me. So really a great term is preparedness. And for all of us, even in our home lives, being prepared, again, helps to keep the anxiety down. It helps people to know what their role is, and it helps us to move through the most difficult and challenging parts of a situation almost reflexively, without having to really stop and think, okay, this is what we do now. So one way that we can do that is to engage in this kind of a cycle. I mean, this is a pretty complex cycle, and we might not all have all of these pieces, but we might have small parts of these pieces. So in terms of preparedness, planning is really an important first step. It's wonderful planning includes things like policies, structure, giving structure to the what will we do if, what will we do when. So planning is number one. Second part is organizing ourselves and figuring out who are the right people to do the work, who in our congregation has experience in some kind of maybe emergency response. Is there somebody in our congregation who is a therapist? Is there somebody in our congregation who has maybe military background? So there's different kinds of gifts and strengths that people can bring into this conversation. Some people just bring presence, and that's an important gift as well. Beyond organizing and finding the right people, we want to train other folks. We want to train people like greeters and ushers and religious education teachers. Those are the folks who may not bring either professional skill or professional experience or life experience into the conversation, but who need to know what to do. Exercise, and this applies to certain kinds of safety. So things like a fire drill. It's a really good idea to try it out and see if it works, and to involve as many people in the congregation as you can in that kind of a practice session, because you'd be surprised it goes much more smoothly if you've done it once or twice before. And then if you have a safe congregations team, maybe that's the board, maybe that's some kind of an executive group, you wanna evaluate these things. You wanna, how often do we want to do the training? Is our policy up to date? Are we continuing this cycle and getting new information, training new people, always thinking ahead? And so evaluating and improving our process. So again, talking about it, for some congregations, safety is one of these things. Well, we don't think anything's going to happen, so we're not going to talk about it. That's not our problem, and we hope it's not. We don't want any of our congregations to be challenged in this way, but having a conversation about it and taking the time to craft policies, to have in-house procedures that will help protect people, places, and things is a really important step. And if you're renting, it's equally important to make sure that all the people who are using your space know what to do. Again, I use the example of a fire. And a fire can be a very small thing. It can be a vent fire in the kitchen, but people need to know what to do when that fire alarm goes off. So there are other kinds of safety considerations that we would want our renters and other users of our space to be aware of. So there's a few quick resources here. And again, we're going to go over some more resources towards the end. But just in terms of being prepared, Church Mutual has a safety checklist, which you can access. And when you have a copy of the PDF, there is a link there to that checklist. You can go around your property and have some folks who know the property well and fill out the checklist. And it helps you to see where are the places that we need to do a little bit more work, where are the places where we haven't done anything at all. And of course, there are lots of resources online. Google is your friend. Disaster preparedness, if that's a concern for you. The government has lots of other resources. We'll go over those again towards the end. Lisa.
So now let's begin with the people. And one of the things I just want to caution you about as Patricia and I begin, and keep on going on tonight, we're going to be giving you sort of a fire hose amount of information and amount of things that you can do. And so sometimes people just sort of throw up their hands and say, I don't know what to do, help. And I always, use the image of how is it that a chihuahua eats an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So what I really encourage you to do on any of this is to begin where you sense there's energy in your congregation, or begin with what is the easiest stuff first, because that will then give you the confidence to go on. And I don't know if any congregation actually does all these things, even though people like Pat and I tell you that this is very important. But the more of them you do, the safer you make your community. And rather than scaring people away by paying attention to these, you make them understand how valuable they are to you, because you are trying to protect them and provide that sanctuary that she spoke about earlier. So let's talk first. When we're talking people, let's talk about medical. There are probably more medical incidents that happen in our congregations than any other kind of safety thing that happens. People who slip and fall and hurt themselves, people who have heart attacks, or young people who fall and break their bones, or people who are diabetic and have reactions and things like that. So it's really good to make sure that you're prepared for the most common things that happen. And so this involves things like making sure that your key leaders are trained in first aid annually. This would include all of your staff, especially those who are there on Sunday, but not just those. And to make sure that your board knows about that as well. And, so you have key people doing this. There's a question about, should a congregation have an EpiPen? I'm not sure about that, because I don't know what the rules and regulations are about providing medication to people without knowing whether or not it's prescribed for them. You should always ask somebody if they have one. But there are other things that you could often have on hand, instead. So just saw that question pop up. But so, the first aid, one of the things I also encourage people to do is to get an AED and train your people annually. There was a story that was in the newspaper where I live, where there was a woman whose husband died at their congregation from a sudden heart attack that could have been revived had the congregation bought an AED. So the first thing that she did with her insurance money was to buy an AED for the congregation and put it in place. They're under $2,000 generally, and it's something that it really does make a difference between life and death for people who have heart attacks. You also need this first aid kit, and you need to let people know where it is. So if you have one, but it's locked in the minister's office or the religious educator's office or something like that, that's not very helpful. So not only have it and have it equipped and make sure that anything that's in it has not expired and that kind of thing. Make sure there's a sign that says first aid supplies are here, and you can have more than one. And somebody has posted, Pat just posted that, people with EpiPen, they really have to self-identify, but you can ask people if they have one, that sort of thing. But you do want to have the signs to the location, and you want to include things like glucose tablets for diabetics and things like that that are non-prescription, because your congregation can get in trouble if you are giving prescription medication to people because, if something goes wrong, you don't want to be in that place. One of the other things that often happens is everybody who's been a longtime member of your congregation will know how to get there. But do they know the address? And so if they're calling 911, it's good to have a landline somewhere that people can do that for, because that automatically in most communities now gives the emergency responders your actual location, but also to make sure that the church address is posted somewhere so that time isn't lost by the first responders having to look out at where is First UU Church of Cupcake anyway. So having that posted and having a landline for this can be good. Of course, people can call from their cell phones, and in some places, our location can be determined, but it saves valuable time if you have that. It's also good to know whether or not, who in your congregation is trained in medicine. So are there nurses, physician's assistant, nurse practitioners, doctors, etc. I remember preaching once in my life before becoming regional staff, where I noticed one of the members of the congregation during the sermon was having a diabetic reaction. And as soon as I saw Marty get up and cross over, I said, okay, I don't have to worry about this, because I knew Marty was a medical doctor. And it's not that you're going to ask people to practice their medicine there, but it's good to have people who can help assess a situation and make sure that there are the right people there. So that's a good thing to have. And one thing that I used to always do when I was minister at every board orientation is I would take people on a tour of the building, all the board members, so that they knew where things like the first aid kit were and the fire extinguishers and all of that, because people might assume that you have them, but they've never really had to know where they are. So making sure that you do those kinds of tours with people can be very helpful. Art has posted on the chat, it's great that, if 911 has been called and the first responders are coming, make sure somebody is at the door or even in the parking lot, several people to help direct them to where the help is needed, so that, again, they don't have to scour your campus if it's a big place. The emergency contacts files is a very important thing as well. It's especially helpful for members of the congregation who may live alone. This can be a simple form that you provide to congregants where you ask them to indicate who it is that should be contacted in case of emergency. There was recently in one of our congregations in Mid-America, the minister died suddenly. And so the congregation was able to look at the emergency contact files, because he was a single man, to find out who should they be calling to let them know, and to, to get the family involved and engaged. So it can happen for your staff or for your people. Now, the sad part of that was his contacts had moved since he filled out that form several years before. So you want to remind people every year to fill this out and to update it. It's a good thing to have in your new member packet. Say, please fill this out and return it. And it can also, if you like, include details about what they might like for a memorial service if it came to that kind of thing. And that helps everybody in the end to have that kind of thing. So it would be, that can be a very important thing to do. Someone is supposed to think that it would be great to have ushers trained to meet with first responders, and that's perfect if the event happens on a Sunday worship or whenever you're worshiping. But these kinds of things could happen throughout the time. So it's a process of training your greeters, training your ushers, training your board members, training your key lay leaders, and doing this every year so that people know how to deal with, where everything is and how to deal with these disasters as they come up. So, all right, and then the next page here, safety guidelines. And often when we talk about safe congregations, this is the only thing that people think about is, how do we protect our children and vulnerable adults? It is very important, but it's not the only thing, as you'll see from us talking about all the other things. We believe that every congregation needs to have policies and procedures for protecting those who are most vulnerable. Young people, vulnerable adults, etc. There is lots of material that's available. There are webinars just on how to do these safe congregations policies, and we can provide samples of the policies for you whenever you want to do that. Also, as we go over resources at the end again, that will let you know who some of the great resources for this. So it includes things like never having just one adult working with young people in a classroom, and other such things, having windows and doors, etc. We will be talking, Deborah, don't worry, about the Safer Congregations program later, and that's a great place to get resources on this.
And some states, particularly Pennsylvania, have really made their policies much more stringent in the last few years. So there are things for volunteers, even things like fingerprinting that's now required that didn't used to be required some years ago. So it's really important to reach out either to your regional staff person, myself, your primary contact, to find out specifically in your area what are the requirements, what are the rules, what are the needs for background checking, how can I do that, where can I do that inexpensively. We have that information for you, but we can't provide it tonight for 10 different states.
Right. Well, but for background checking, one of the quickest resources I mentioned is Church Mutual has trusted employees as their group. And we switched to using them as a region for all our volunteers and for our staff, because we found that they were very comprehensive and very economical. So then when we're talking about sex offender policies, the main thing to do is, people will often tisk at the Roman Catholic Church for all that happened there. Well, I want to let you know we're not as big as them, so our history is not as, we don't have as many in numbers, but we do have in our congregations many examples over time of people who have abused and injured people, not only in the congregation, but also those who come who are registered sex offenders, who want to be part of our religious community. And we believe that it's very important for our congregations to make a home for people who are on sexual offender registries with appropriate boundaries and restrictions, because we have to balance the welcome with also the responsibility to keep everyone safe. And so one of the things that we do is, don't presume it doesn't happen where you are. There need to be policies and procedures. we strongly recommend that you have a limited access agreement for any person who you know to be a sex offender, that they should never be alone with, especially with youth. But if their offense was against adults, that's something you need to, look at. They should have designated companions in the congregation. If people are not willing to sign this, then the congregation needs to be strong enough to say, then perhaps you don't understand what it means to be in covenant here within Unitarian Universalism, where we want to welcome you, and we also need to protect everyone involved. So you have to make, ask people to make that disclosure. You can on forms say, membership intake forms, you could say to people, please, we require you to disclose to the minister or some other person in your congregation, if you don't have one, whether or not you are on this register. And it not only does it safeguard your members and the young people in that, but it also safeguards the sex offender themselves. Because if these policies and procedures are in place, then when somebody says, uh-oh, they did something, and you can say, no, they had this companion with them, there was nothing going on, it can protect them as well, as far as how you deal with them in the sex offender registry. He was not a sex offender, but I'll never forget when it was years ago now, a gentleman in the congregation, he and his wife taught religious education for a long time, but he was moving to the younger group, to the preschool age kids. And he was concerned about how parents might feel with him helping toilet their children. And so we tried to figure out, what's the best way for him to approach this? And so we came up with the question that he asked every parent, which was, what help does your child need with toileting? And that way he would know what the parent expected. The parent would know that he might be involved. And if the parent didn't want him involved, they would say, please come and get me. And so it made it safe for everyone. Another thing that we need to look at there too is the whole travel guidelines. Many of our youth groups and many of our religious education programs have trips with people. So what are your guidelines for your drivers? Do you check their driving record and that they have a valid driver's license? What forms do you have them fill out, and all of that kinds of things? It also gets very complex when you're taking your youth on overnight trip. So what are your sleeping arrangements? Or if you're hosting a conference in your congregation, what is how do you figure out the sleeping arrangements? When you have a con in your congregation, we used to think back in the old days that if you had the male identified people in one room and the female identified people in another room, that nothing would happen. Well, now we know that sexual attraction and sexual behavior does not just follow on heterosexual lines. So it means that there's all sorts of questions. And how do you incorporate the fact that we have more and more young people who are knowing themselves to be transgender? How do we support them and protect the children? Laird asked the question about how do you negotiate with your insurance provider when considering allowing a registered sex offender into the congregation. If you look at the Church Mutual website, they have lots of information on there about sex offenders. And if you have a policy in place, if you have the limited access agreement, and if you're following those policies, then you should be fine. But the scary thing that Church Mutual has said to us is it's better to have no policy than to have a policy that you do not follow. But best of all is having the policies that you follow. But if you have a policy in place that you just blow off, you will be in worse shape than if you don't have any. But you will still be in bad shape unless you do have a policy that you follow and you are paying attention to. Pat, anything else you want to add on that one? I see that Deborah posted a comment about not being sure that it's true that you will lose your insurance. I'm not aware of any congregation that has lost their insurance for including a sex offender under a limited access agreement. It doesn't mean that hasn't happened under some other circumstances that
where we don't know the whole story. But as a rule, I'm not aware that that is the case. And we've worked with Church Mutual quite a bit. In fact, in our Safe Congregations group that meets regionally, they've come and visited with us and spoken with us and really been very supportive of the work that we do.
Right, and Deborah posts that that she's worked with Church Mutual on creating guidelines for the UUA and that they have not been that way. It's really, nothing ever prevents you from being sued. But what if you can show that you have taken due diligence, that you have appropriate policies, that you review them regularly, that you follow them, that you have people sign an ethics statement when they work with your young people, and that those are always very important things to have in place.
And we're going
maybe we need to move on to
yeah, we just want to move on, but we'll point you to the Safer Congregations website a little bit later. But sometimes a smaller congregation or a congregation that hasn't yet done this work has an incident and they don't have a policy. What do we do now? We act as though we had a policy. We go and we look for a template for a policy, and we try to follow along with that. Even though it may not be a policy that our board has voted in, it's a best practice. It's something that we can hang our hat on if we reach the point where we're in a situation with the insurance company or in a liability situation.
And I'm just going to give Kim the last word, because she points out that in all of our congregations, we probably have sex offenders, ones who are not on registers, ones who have not been discovered. And so having the policies is important. The safety policies about, two adults in a classroom, two unrelated adults in a classroom, that kind of thing, is designed to protect from the people we don't know. So that's something always important to remember. So the next slide is about stranger danger. And this is the thing that usually freaks congregations out the most and scares them the most, is what happens if that person comes in here and does X? And of course, this is a very scary thing. And these days, the incidents of attacks on congregations are increasing and such. But in actuality, given the number of congregations that there are in the world, this is a relatively rare occurrence. There are very few instances where someone comes in having no relationship with the congregation and then commits mayhem. We all do know, probably remember in Knoxville, though, when that happened a number of years ago now, where several people were injured and one gentleman was murdered by someone who came in. But that, again, is very rare. So again, it's always awareness and preparedness first. It's being attentive to your environment, making sure that you do train the ushers and greeters so that they sort of recognize not who's strange, but what behavior might be weird, because I can always tell when I am bound to GA every year, General Assembly, when I get to the airport in the city in which General Assembly is happening, I can pick out the UUs because they're the ones who look strangest in that airport. So, we have to make sure that we're not profiling people, but we pay attention. Is someone carrying something that just looks a bit odd and a bit strange, or are people not making good contact with us? And so we need to be aware of that kind of thing and be mindful of it. We have to make sure too that we, one thing too is often predators will come to a congregation looking for ones that aren't serious about their safety. And so they could take advantage of young people that way. And so that's why congregations should have a policy of no one working with children until they've been at least 6 months in the congregation. And some congregations I know have a year or 2 year time frame of waiting before, because you want to make sure that the people are there. You want to also make sure that you safeguard your member and friend contact information. So rather than having a stack of directories there that list the children and their ages and their parents' names and addresses and phone numbers and all of that, that just anybody can take, you want to make sure that those are in a place where they're more confined and that you share them with people who are already in the member place. People who are our predators are going places to try to find, so that they could go to the neighborhood school and say, hey, Susie, and here's where photographic directories can be even more problematic. So they go up to Susie and say, hey, I know you from church. Your parents are so and so and so and so. They asked me to come pick you up because there's something wrong. So you need to be careful about this stuff. You don't need to be draconian and just not allow things to be there, but you need to make sure that you are mindful of how you are making the public information about people available. You should never put in your newsletter last names of children, when there are pictures, or on your website. You should make sure that if you do reporting, of joys and sorrows and that kind of thing, you don't say that someone is about to take a vacation. You say someone came back from their vacation, and all sorts of things like that. And so you then have to, the main thing to do is to create a response plan. What do you do? Who calls what? How do you check this kind of thing out? How do you check people out? What's going on? What's the best way to work with this? And again, on many of these, on ready.gov, there is information on this, as well as on the Church Mutual website. Church Mutual probably insures 60 to 70% of our UU congregations, and they have tons of resources available. You don't have to be insured by them to use their resources. There might be some that you don't get as quick access to, but they have a lot of public safety information there. You want to train your greeters and ushers. You want to have point people on duty each week whose job it is to be the ones who are the key watchers that day. If you have information that, or if you're doing something that is controversial in your community, you might want to suggest that some of the stronger, non-deterred people are sort of some of the ushers or the people sitting at the back of a space, so that they can look, that kind of thing. And you have to be, curious about who comes in, but not paranoid. Deborah says, is there a list of what behaviors would indicate someone who might be a danger? It's really hard to tell, because some people look present very well. And other people might appear jumpy, but, is that jumpiness a medical condition or something that has nothing to do with danger? So it's hard to figure out before something happens. I remember one of the conversations that I heard when I was at the Knoxville responding after the shooting there was the members told me that Greg, the gentleman who died, he was totally beloved in the congregation. And they were talking about, well, what do we do now? Maybe we should get metal detectors. And they were talking about how Greg would have known how to get a great deal on them and would have been able to figure out how to equip them with solar energy so that, they're doing all this good thing. But then they stopped and they asked themselves the question, would we put the metal detectors before or after the welcome table? And they just started to laugh, because they realized they didn't want to be people who had metal detectors and said to the world, we are afraid of who you are. Instead, they went into a program where they learned more about how to protect themselves and how to respond. Because there's no way that you can really predict anyone who will do this kind of thing. Okay, so hazard prevention. This gets a bit around the building, but it's amazing to me how many times I go to congregations, and we go to a lot of them, where we'll show up where the snow hasn't been shoveled or the ice salted, where their downspouts are getting torrential water right by the doors, where it's very difficult for anyone to get in, that kind of thing. So it's always important to look at your physical space and see, where are the hazards here? Does your playground equipment follow safety guidelines? How long ago was it built? Does it, are there splinters on the wood? Do you have the right kind of padding underneath all of that kind of thing? In your nursery, do you have cribs that pass the current safety standards, or are they hand-me-downs from 45 years ago? All of that kind of stuff. What is your lighting like for nighttime security, both of the building but also of people leaving? Do you have a system where you ask people to buddy up when they're walking to the parking lot after dark? That kind of thing is there. And do people know how to let you know that something's wrong and ask for a repair and getting that? And so all of that is important to make sure that you're preventing hazards. You also want to maintain sufficient insurance coverage to protect the congregation. Now this is, protecting the buildings, of course, but also protecting the people. You need to make sure that your policies cover sexual harassment, sexual assault, different things like that, that they cover your volunteers in case anything happens there, that you have officers and directors insurance that protects the people who are elected to help your congregation. And a comprehensive church policy covers most of that material. Okay, so then we have emergency response. Again, this is protecting the people, but the question is, do you in your congregation have plans both for evacuation and sheltering in? If it's tornadoes or hurricanes or things like that, you'll want to shelter in. If it's fire or other things like that, you'll want to be able to evacuate people. So do you have you created these? And often congregations will have them, but they don't ever practice them, and they don't ever post them, and nobody knows what they are all about. So you need to do things like design the evacuation room. What are 2 ways to get out of every room in your congregation? And you draw that on a map, and you have that map up in the room. And one of the things you need to do is to make sure that when they're looking at the map, the orientation of the map is the way the building actually looks. If you always put north on the top, but they're looking west, it's going to be confusing in times of emergency. So you want to make sure that you do that. With the evacuation, you want to make sure that there are 2 safe places that you go to. So there's a safe place, everybody is supposed to go to the old oak tree in the parking lot. Well, but what happens if the fire originated at the old oak tree? You're going to want to take people somewhere else. So you have two places that are separated so that people know where to go. But you always go to one, to the A spot first. And if that's not safe, then you go to B. One of the hardest things when you're talking about evacuation is convincing the parents that somebody else will take responsibility for their young people, and they don't have to crowd into your religious education space to rescue their children. And so you have to make sure that every year you are training your teachers, but also that you have other specific people in the congregation who are designated to be the ones to go help out in RE. Because if you have 2 teachers in a class of 15, or 10 even, or, if any of them have special needs, you're going to have a hard time getting them all out of the building. So you want to do that. And you have to
it's really important that parents know if the children and youth have a different gathering place. Parents need to know what that gathering, so they may be evacuating out of your sanctuary, and children and youth may be evacuating out of a completely different building, a completely different space. And firefighters will tell you that a parent will go back into a burning building if they don't know where their child is. So that communication is essential for that situation.
Yes. And part of the reason why you have the drills is to calm the parents so they know that you really are taking care of their children. Because if you evacuate the children and the adults, and they all end up in one, I'm going to assume right now, one site where you all gather, when they see their kids there from the test, they will say, oh yeah, they did do this right. They know what they're doing. And I say at least once a year. It can be good to, you can do this 2 or 3 times a year, especially right when you're bringing this out, so that people get accustomed and acclimatized to how this will all work. Similarly, with sheltering in, you need to figure out what are the safest places in your congregations. Where do we hide from tornadoes and hurricanes? How do we do that? And how do you, again, deal with parents and young people might be in different places? And do the drill for the sheltering in. Again, post maps in every room for this. You also can consider for this kind of thing whether or not you want to be responders for your community. And so that you would have emergency supplies there for people to make sure that, that you have water and blankets and food supplies in, so that if a disaster happens, if your people are there, you can help them, but you can also help your wider community. When I worked with one of our congregations just north of San Francisco as their interim minister, one of the things we did while I was there was we went into their shed where they had their big garbage cans full of supplies and replaced everything that was out of date, so that because they wanted to do that. And I know that in one of our Michigan congregations, last week we had over 800,000 households without power. And so they opened up their church as a warming center. So what do you need to do those kinds of things? All right. So one of the things that we have to help us in our association is the trauma response ministry. The UU Trauma Response was created in the aftermath of the bombing or the planes flying into the to the World Trade Centers, on September 11th, and the plane into the Pentagon. We realized at that point that we had no national body that would certify people that they were qualified in disaster recovery or trauma ministry. And so I was part of the group that founded the Trauma Ministry. It's a organization dear to my heart. And until I went on staff, I was on their board, but I can't do both at the same time. So the Trauma Response Ministry is there to help congregations when you face the impossible. So if a trauma happens, they are willing to come out and to work with the congregation. That's who I went with in Knoxville. They went to Katrina. They've been to, murder, suicides in congregations, or death, young people being killed in traffic accidents. All sorts of different things are happening. These days, they're also being called out to do a lot more education to people, with people, about what is the nature of trauma? What is the cycle that a congregation is going to follow? With one of our congregations in New York City having swastikas carved into its door, and one of our congregations in New Orleans having a brick thrown through their windows. Many of these politically motivated, they've been helping the congregations understand how to respond to trauma, what is the natural response that members in their congregations may have. And they do that, they go out once a trauma has happened at no cost to a congregation. But if you want to bring them in for training, yes, they do ask you to pay some costs to help with that. But this is a great group, and we can, if it's not on our slides at the end, we can tell you how to get in touch with the Trauma Ministry.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I invited you to come to this.
And
really,
sorry for the motor mouth and all this, but I get excited and there's so much to cover.
A deep resource. Lisa's really got great experience in lots of different areas related to safety, so I really appreciate that. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the places. We touched on that a little bit when we were talking about, sort of the hazards that can impact people, and many of those things cross over into things having to do with our actual physical spaces. It's always important to look for the obvious in our congregations. Are we putting boxes and things in the hallway? Do we have chairs that are impeding the aisle in our worship space? Do we have, are we putting ice melt out, even if we're not really sure and it looks okay, but no, let's put some ice melt out anyway. So we look for the obvious things, kind of the things that we might do around our own home, keeping things like tools and sharp objects away from young children, things like the things in your outlet, in your nursery, to keep little ones from sticking fingers into a live electrical outlet. All of those kind of common sense things. Our church is our home, in the sense that we live there, we spend time there, and we can trip and fall at church just as easily as we can trip and fall in our own basement. one of the things that's really become sort of talk about a nuisance is people stealing copper. And so copper can be in your building, particularly if you have an older space, although not always. Copper piping, copper shingles, copper like a bay window with a copper flashing. There's money to be made for unscrupulous individuals in lifting off that copper and walking away with it.
Air conditioning units.
Air conditioning units, yeah, HVAC. So if there are, those kinds of things, we need to just be checking them, and we need to, if they can be somehow, if there's a regular checklist of going around, we wouldn't want to find out the hard way that somebody has taken some copper from a really, from a HVAC unit, for example, and then when we go to turn it on, it's not operational. Of course, we want to have some kind of fire notification system. If you are in a somewhat newer building, I'm hoping that you have a fire alarm of some kind, whether you have an actual fire alarm that's connected to your local fire department, or whether you just have, carbon monoxide or fire smoke alarms in the ceiling. There should be some kind of non-human intervention type way of letting us know that, hey, something's happening. Certainly if we have phones around the building, now many of our congregations actually don't have physical phones out in open spaces anymore. Most of the phones are located in offices, and those offices on Sunday, for example, or even in the evening meeting time, might be locked. So people need to either, if they're using their cell phones, there needs to be instructions posted that indicate what the building address is. Emergency numbers, minister, board president. If you have, like if it's something like the power has gone out, or you've been struck by lightning, or a tree has fallen down, you probably want to list the head of your buildings and grounds committee if you have a committee like that. So who are the key people? Who needs to know if something happens? And those should be listed, because you don't know who's going to physically be in the building when something happens. It could be a tree falls down on your property and it's a renter there. And so they don't know, they're not going to know intuitively, oh yeah, I'll just call the board president, because they may not have any idea who that is. Your kitchen, if you have a modern kitchen, and certainly if you have a commercial kitchen, you should have a fire suppression system of some kind, whether it's the venting, the kind over the stove with the venting and suppression, or whether it's a traditional old sprinkler system. There are a number of different kinds of systems that you'll find in commercial kitchens. If you don't have a commercial kitchen, again, you should have a smoke detector, some kind, a heat detector, anything, again, that doesn't require somebody being in the space present, but will alert people who are nearby to the fact that something could be going on. Fire extinguishers should be in key areas around the building. They shouldn't be in a space where young children can get to them. They are heavy and they do contain chemical. So we don't want them to be in a space and in a place where a young child could accidentally access a fire extinguisher. And you need to tell people about the fire extinguishers. Things like, for if you have fire extinguishers in an RE building, for example, you want to make sure that your RE teacher training in the beginning of the year lets people know, A, that they're there, and B, how to use them, when to use them, what kinds of fires this particular fire extinguisher is actually suitable for. Not all fire extinguishers are suitable for all types of fires. So there's some awareness, there's some training that needs to happen. Some of this is common sense, and people may know this from having a fire extinguisher in their own home. If you are lucky enough to have a fireplace in your congregation, lucky you on a night like tonight, but they do bring in another sort of interesting level of concern. Fireplaces, obviously, they need to have fireplace screening or fireplace glass doors, something that contains the fire. They should be there. There are particular ways that we would prepare for a fire, things like having water nearby and making sure that there is somebody assigned to actually sort of be the fire watcher. So you just need to use some common sense with something like a fireplace. Playground safety, if you can have cushioning material, whether it's wood chips or whether it is some other, whether it's a grassy surface, it's wonderful if you can have that. If you can't, hopefully you can have adults monitoring the young people who are in the playground in ways that will hopefully keep them safe. But that doesn't always happen. Our kids, they just want to fall down off a monkey bar sometime or fall from a swing, and when that happens, then our other safety emergency preparedness goes into action. We talked a little bit already about lighting and address on the outside of buildings. So if somebody comes along, is driving by and sees a tree through your roof, or says, oh my goodness, is there smoke behind that building? But they don't belong to the congregation, they don't really know who you are, and they come up to the front door and the front door is locked, it's great to have information actually physically on the outside of the building, because something can happen when there's not somebody present who can get in or knows that information. Oh, Lisa.
Things. Okay, so the things part has actually gotten much easier than when I used to teach this webinar, 10 years ago, or, teach people about this. This is how do you protect the information that's really important to your congregation. So data safety is one thing, and making sure that you have offsite backup of all your information. Cloud storage has made this very helpful. But part of this as well is, and Patricia, you might want to mute while you're typing.
Sorry.
I know how that goes. So that makes it very helpful. But, another part of data safety is making sure that it's not only one person who has access to any of the data stuff, including your website and any social media presence. I just had a conversation with a congregation last week who some of their board members were behaving not well and posted lewd material on the congregation's Facebook page that nobody else could get rid of because they were the only one who had the password. So, you need to be careful even about stuff like that. But now having offsite backups and cloud storage is very easy, and it's well worth the price. Many of those services allow it to be encrypted as things happen. Which can be helpful too, to make sure that you are protecting the information of your congregation members. You also, with your equipment, for insurance and other purposes, you want to know what you have and maintain that inventory, and again, have that in your cloud backup, your offsite backup. Because if a fire does impact your building and your equipment, the insurance company will ask you questions like, well, what do you have and how long have you had that? And in order to be able to get your money back for those kinds of things, it's helpful to do that. Archives as well. I can't tell you how many congregations lose their archives and their history and can't answer any questions about themselves because the stuff is in somebody's attic or basement who no longer belongs to the congregation. And so finding, again, offsite backup that is either owned by the congregation is good, rather than offsite backups in everybody's basement, etc., and cloud storage. One of the things that can be difficult these days is that people have lots of stuff in their computers, but if it's not in a centralized location, you have to track down who has that. That's one of the things that we as a region have to struggle with, because all our staff have their own computers and we're not necessarily hooked into one site. So how do you make sure that you have this? And someone is also suggesting, photograph everything. You can take a digital camera and just walk around your building with it and use that as part of your documentation for what you have. But the bottom line is redundancy, redundancy, redundancy. One of the great things about having off-site cloud-based storage is that if something happens like Katrina, one of the issues was that people did not know where anybody was, and they couldn't reach out to their members because a lot of the stuff was simply in hard copy in the office. Well, if a disaster happens in your area, one of the things that your regional staff can help you do, if you have cloud backup, is they can go in and access some of that data. And if you're willing, allow another congregation to volunteer to be the check-in point for you all, so that you don't, as you're dealing with your own home, you don't have to worry about everyone else, but another congregation across the country is able to be that reference point for everybody to be able to check in. And so that's part of the thing part that the redundancy and the social media now allows you to do. And now we're on to resources. So we've mentioned that the UUA website has a lot of things. As Patricia mentioned earlier, even just Googling disaster preparedness can really help. Ready.gov, which you'll see partway down the page, is, well, it has been, I haven't checked it recently, but it has been a resource that has a lot of good, a website that is maintained by the government that has a lot of good resources about how do you create disaster plans, how, what's important to think about.
Yeah, I just checked it yesterday, and it's still
good. Not like some other websites.
Right.
One of the things that people often can be cautious about or not sure if they want to do is your local community policing officers. Mm-hmm. UUs have sometimes an abnormally highly finely tuned abhorrence of authority and assume that the police are out there to get people. And I'm telling you, as a 10-year veteran of police chaplaincy, 90% to 95% of the officers I ever met and worked with went into policing for the exact same reason I went into ministry, which was to make the world a better place. And they would much rather work with you to let you know what's right about your building and your space and your security than have to deal with cleaning up the aftermath. So, form a relationship with them. Find out what's going on.
Most police, moderate size police departments will have a community service officer, and that's their full-time job. That's what they do. They go out into the community and they make these kinds of, they do training. They want to connect with you. They'd much rather get to know your space. Many of our congregations are, connected buildings that maybe one time they made sense, and then once you're inside, it's so confusing. We don't know which way is up. They'd like to take a walk through your space and see, where are the dead ends and where are the things that they might need to worry about. And the fire department is also a good person to contact. Similar kind of conversation. This is our space. What do you recommend?
And the fire departments in some communities will help you organize your fire drills and will review your plans and all that kind of stuff. So that's, those are really good resources. And even though
and my congregation
isn't paying taxes, your members are. So,
my congregation several years ago actually had a fire drill, and the fire truck came, and the fire truck stayed afterwards, and they gave out flyers, and they talked to the kids, and it really was a real community service moment. So it could be fun too.
And Deborah, I see in the chat, has already sort of tried to beat us to it, but before we move to the next page, your own insurance company, if you don't have Church Mutual, call your own insurance company. And many of the insurance companies will send someone out to talk with you about your coverage, about how to keep yourself safe. And then, YouTube has tons of videos on church safety, as well as, sleeping kitten pictures and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So Deborah posted about this in the chat, but why don't you talk about this one, Patricia?
Sure. So the UUA supports a program that was created by the Religious Institute, which is an organization that Deborah was a founder and recently retired director of for a number of years. They created a program with 18 different practices that they recommend for all congregations. You don't have to do all 18, but they kind of give you the whole map of how to be a safer congregation. They range from getting board buy-in to youth safety to what are some other? I don't have it in front of me. Sexual offender, the limited access agreement for sexual offenders. So it really covers the whole range of what a congregation might want to do. For me, the best thing about this is that for each one of the 18 best practices that they've identified, and this is a broad program. This program is for a congregation of any denomination, and there is a seal that you actually get if you complete the program. But what I think is really great about this resource is they give you samples of absolutely everything. So you're interested in knowing what a safe congregation policy might be. There's one that's really comprehensive as a sample. There's another template that's a very simple policy that anybody can kind of tailor to their own needs. There are things about social media. There are again youth policies, youth trip guidelines, lots and lots of different areas of safety with templates and samples for every different area. There's a self-assessment. So you start out by saying, what do we already have? What conversations do we need to have? What work do we have to do? And you go from there.
And one of the things I like about it too is that for smaller congregations, they realize that, 18 might be some of them might not apply to you. So there's a lower number that I think there are 14. And I think, isn't it 75% that you have to have in order to gain the certification? I'm sure Deborah will help us if we've forgotten all the details, or Kim, because she is on the team with us. And in each region, as Patricia said earlier, there is one of us is part of the Safe Congregations team, and it's our job to help you access this and to help learn about this. So, anybody who is in Central East who's doing this, Patricia's your person to ask the questions about. If you are from the New England region, Kim, who you've seen posting, is there. And if you're in Mid-America, I'm the person to talk to about this. And our job and our delight is to help you figure out how to do this, because we know it helps your congregation be safer. And that actually makes you more attractive to people who are to our congregation shopping. And Deborah, yes, she confirmed that if you are a larger congregation, you need to have 14 out of the 18 in place. And if you're smaller than 11 out of the 14, if you're under 100 members.
And if you do enter into this program and do the work around becoming a safer congregation, you get to display this very cool logo on your website. But even if you look at it and you say, oh, wow, so much work to do, we're really not ready. It still is a great roadmap for every congregation to take those steps, each step towards becoming a safer congregation. It really helps you lay it out and helps you with templates and samples. Okay, well, we have a few minutes for question and answers. If you have a question and you wanna put yourself on video, we can try and do that. We also will take questions in the chat box. If we don't have time, if we have lots of questions and we don't have time for all of them, we are going to we'll be saving what's in the chat, and we'll try to answer those questions after our time is done. Oh, Art says, we live in a glass house. do we have anything, know anything about dealing with lockdown with glass doors? Where are you? What town? What city? Are you in a place with tornadoes, frequent tornadoes, or just curious?
And if it's, if it's for intruders or things like that, or for disaster, there are companies that would be able to have solutions for you, but you could, design your own wooden shutters that could immediately, easily be put in place, or things like that. I'm sure there are woodworkers and other people in the congregation who might deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
I always assume that anybody can get into any space that they want, and yeah, film for glass that makes it more like automobile glass. So when it shatters, as opposed to the very destructive, tempered glass, in that might work well. One of the things that that one congregation I know about, they used to have large plate glass windows, and everyone, they would get broken fairly regularly. They said it was because they were great social activists. I sort of thought it was because of the teens in the neighborhood, but who knows? But what they did is they learned how to make a particular type of stained glass, and as a congregation project, created a stained glass window there instead, so that and yeah, glass can be an issue, and yet it also allows you to be open and inviting. So so you could even move to plexiglass, or things like that if you're worried about safety.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a question about, well, Deborah's asking for some training resources for ushers and greeters, and we can provide that. Actually, post-webinar, you're actually going to get a handout kind of thing with a list of lots of different links and resources. So I can make sure, I can check and make sure there's something for that. Also a question about CPR training for ushers. Lisa, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I wouldn't do it for ushers. I would do it for anybody in your congregation. Mm-hmm. One of the things I know is that Seattle is the safest city in the world practically, to have a heart attack, because so many people are trained in CPR. But I would also suggest that it might be a good idea for you to get the AED and have it a CPR first aid AED training. And many organizations can come in and host that for you, or you can, community education programs have that.
And it can also be a chicken and egg kind of thing. So you can find out in your community who has CPR certification, and maybe invite one or two of them to become part of the usher team. So rather than training ushers in a skill they don't have, look for who has the skill and maybe inviting them.
And Lane asks about background checks. It should be okay if one of the two leaders? Absolutely not. Every person who is working with minors needs a background check, because how do you know you're checking the right one of the two? For one thing. Plus, also explain to your insurance company why you didn't do the other one, or to your parents if something were to happen. And so we strongly recommend that. It's very easy to do. And as someone posted earlier, the Church Mutual one is $5.75 per for each one you do, which is a very reasonable cost. And then the other question is, so how often do you do them? We generally do them, recommend every 2 or 3 years you have people rechecked, but also in the ethics guidelines that you have them sign, it should say right in there that they will notify you of any situations that are going on, so that you can make sure that that there is that safety provided, because if you did check the wrong one, I can't imagine how devastated your community would be, the people who made the decision about which one to check would be, and live with the guilt of what, of that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and I know that you can get pushback from folks, either people who've been volunteering for a long time and says, but you know me and I've been doing this forever. You can also get pushback from parents who feel like, hey, this is just like a play date at my house. And you have to sort of let them bring them around to the idea that this is part of our covenant. This is part of how we provide a safe community. And, what are the other safety considerations that you would have us not do that we think are important?
And Lane, I see your post that says that, yes, you agree with us, and I'm glad we can provide cover for you to say, but they told us we had to do it this way. So, blame it on Patricia and I, and we'll have your backs on that. And Laird, thanks for all your information about, the glass and the Lexan polycarbonate, and, that film might work better, because that's good to know. I didn't know that myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah.
And else that they would like to have usher training as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Okay, and Lane, yeah, thanks for that type of correction there. She said, I can't, it said not quote, I can't quote you, but it should have been now. Great. So yes, I always tell people, just warn me what what you're blaming on me, and I'll have your back. And in this case, we know that, this is the issue, but we'll have your back because it is so important. And it's also about the long-term viability of the congregation, because if you don't do the checks and someone successfully sues you, your congregation is out of business. So $5.75 versus out of business, it's good. Yeah, and as as Deborah says, and as I talked about earlier, it provides protection for the volunteers or for any sex offenders who are in your congregation under a limited access agreement.
Mm-hmm. Any suggestions how to get members and leadership excited about addressing this issue? Well, if liability doesn't excite them, the potential for liability doesn't excite them. Again, I think it's just returning to the idea of covenant. I think it is, beginning with a few first steps. What does it mean to be safe in our congregation, and perhaps hold some kind of a forum, invite people into a conversation around that. Start at the very beginning. What makes you feel safe? And what are the kinds of things that you expect from the congregation? And people probably have a long list of things the expectations for safety in the congregation. So then the next question is, how are we together as a community going to assure that we can make that happen?
Right, and the fact that you're here tonight says that you understand how important it is. So I'm just sharing, that, as Patricia was saying, but I also find food is a great enticement. Have them, just watch. The good news about some of the stuff on Church Mutual is they have short snippets of information on YouTube, that gets people thinking and talking. And if they want a list of disasters that we know have happened in congregations, we can prepare that list to scare the bejesus out of them too, about, well, here's what's happened. I had one congregation in our region who lost its insurance because they refused to deal with the squirrels that were eating through their electrical wires in their attic. Now, when do you think you might need fire insurance? It's when the squirrels are eating through the wires in your attic. So the thought of, not taking care of that finally dawned on them. Oh, I guess, they're really taking it seriously, because their insurance was on the verge of being canceled. And that you can also, and scare, fear is not always a good tactic. But saying to, if they don't think that they need directors and officers insurance, asking them how much each director or officer of the congregation is willing to risk from their personal fortunes to keep things safe.
Mm-hmm.
So
another, kind of a key strategy is also bringing the conversation in from the margins of the congregation. So sometimes there's a lot of attention and a lot of energy around how are we going to protect the kids. And so that kind of falls into the lap of the DRE or the lap of an RE council or an RE committee. And there might be issues around building safety that are really at the heart of what the Building and Grounds Committee has done. But they're sort of marginalized from the main leadership of the congregation. and from the main opportunities to communicate the needs to a larger part of the congregation. So as much as possible, getting that conversation into the board, make it a board conversation, make it a leadership conversation, can really help it kind of infuse it through the rest of the community.
In our Mid-America region, there were several of us who wanted to work on Safe Congregations information. And in the end, part of the decision came down to this thing about bringing it in from the margins. That if we had the people who were only identified with religious education or youth or whatever, too often they were marginalized in the conversation. So as someone who rarely deals with young people or youth, to be able to say this is important, that's part of the reason why I was chosen, was to bring it more center stage, because it is about more than just the kids and just the RE program.
Well, Lisa, that sounds like a great place to bring our time together to a close. And I hope that if no other message is a takeaway for you, I hope that just the message of taking the first step is the most important one for you, for each congregation. And that may be true no matter where you are. If you have no safe congregation policy at all, your first step might be to begin to enter into a conversation. If you're a congregation where you want to broaden, you have a children and youth, but you want to broaden it, then that's your first step. If you have a policy that's 8 or 10 years old, you really need to dust it off and figure out what your first step is. So go ahead, Lisa.
And Pat, I'm assuming that this webinar will be archived and that people can then share it with others in their congregations?
Absolutely. So we have been recording, as we said at the beginning, and this will be made into a YouTube video and will be available on the Central East website, and we will make sure that you get that link.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you all for being with us. Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful to step into your region and be part of this tonight.
Great to have our guest presenter in Lisa. Thank you.